Welcome to our Chats with Two Rabbis. It is Wednesday, November 4th, and we welcome all of you. And Rabbi, take it away.
Okay. Well, this is a very auspicious occasion, really an historic occasion in the United States. And we were supposed to have Rabbi Tzvi Kahn come on with us. Maybe he'll be joining us, I don't know. But I do see that we have an angel in the audience. We have Suzanne with a halo over her head and in Disney World, so that's always good. So we do have some holiness here with us. We were going to speak about the Torah passage for a little bit and then talk about Jewish unity and then obviously talk a bit about the elections. So I'm just going to make it brief because we don't have a lot of people here and Rabbi Kahn's not here. I'll just mention that the Torah reading is quite amazing. I encourage you to check out our Shabbat celebration. I'll be talking quite a bit about it, so I won't say that much about it now, but it's called Vayera, and it talks about when God appears. And I give a little message about how can we make God appear in our lives? How is that possible? So join with us on Friday and you'll hear that. Also, we're going to talk about Jewish unity. For that, I think I'll open it up to everybody else. I have my own thoughts, but I'm sure you do too. So maybe we could have other people weigh in about what we need to do to bring the Jewish people together. I'm open to your comments and suggestions. So I see Harris, you want to start the ball rolling?
No, I was just waving to Sharon.
Thank you, Harris.
Good. I see we got Steve Geller on the line. Would you like to share with us some of your thoughts about how we can achieve greater unity among the Jewish people?
Oh, I was here for the Rabbi Kahn seminar. Am I early or late or totally?
You're on time. Rabbi Kahn, for some reason, isn't here. I'm not sure why.
Did you try to get a hold of him, Rabbi?
I did. I just got his machine.
Oh.
So
Let me try it again. I actually grew up with Rabbi Kahn in New Orleans. I became observant about a year before he did, and when I was down there, basically lived out of his house.
Wow.
And I can tell you, yeah, it's not. Let me try to get his wife. Give me one quick second. And I actually graduated high school with his wife. We were in the same class.
Wow.
So
you know him a lot better than me. I've only known him a few months.
I got to tell you, there are things about them that you guys should know that are, it's just really amazing.
Go ahead. You can, after you try reaching, maybe you can fill us in a little bit.
Oh, for sure.
Who's trying to call him? Are you trying to call him, Steve?
I'm trying to get his wife.
Okay, because maybe he got mixed up with the date, because I did email it to him this morning.
No, I talked to him today, so I don't think there was any issues.
I'm gonna mute. I was gonna mute you, Stephen.
Why don't you
I was
fill
just
us
gonna
in?
mute you.
I'm getting a voicemail. It's nice to meet you also. I'll keep trying.
Jerry, hi Jerry. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Good to be seen. How are you?
Hey,
Very
Jerry.
good. Are you still up north?
We are. We're coming down November 19th.
Wow. Wow. Is your wife doing okay?
She is. I'm going to move her wheelchair so she can see you.
Okay,
great.
that's awesome.
So we have
Hi,
Stephen
Carol.
Geller, and I'd like to hear from him. But we also have Carol Garrett. We were fortunate to have Carol entertain for us, perform as a cantor at L'Dor Va-Dor in the past, and we reconnected, and she came on. So, Carol, we're talking about what we can do to achieve greater unity among the Jewish people. Would you want to weigh in on that and offer some thoughts about how we can achieve greater unity?
I think it's really important for people to be kind and considerate to each other. and to support each other and not judgmental. I think in many instances, Jewish people from different backgrounds are judgmental, and there's expectations that if, you know, you're not doing these things, so you know, the more Orthodox have expectations of what they are supposed to do, and I think we all have to really understand and support and respect each other's ways of life.
Well, aren't Jews judgmental though? Our holiest day is the day of judgment. And also we're told to chastise our neighbors if they're not doing the right thing. So if somebody's like supporting a candidate who's doing really awful things, in our opinion, should we not form an opinion? Should we not form a judgment, or just say, hey, whatever, you want to do these crazy things or you want to do things that are harmful? We don't judge.
Well, that's an interesting thought, and I think you know, even in this position with us voting for different candidates, it's okay to say I believe in this candidate, but in the end, we can't hurt our neighbor because they voted differently than us. We can't hate each other because our views are different. I think we still, you know, whoever we voted for, I'm still going to have the same neighbors. I'm still going to have the same friends. I'm still going to live in the same community. And, you know, in my opinion, hopefully the regime changes at the moment. But if it doesn't, I mean, I may still work toward an end of seeing that the regime changes at some point. But I still think we have to support each other. So, yeah, I think you chastise when somebody's really, truly doing wrong. You know, you're hurting someone, you're hurting yourself, you're harming the community, you're harming the environment. But, you know, if it doesn't check those boxes, then I think we support and tolerate each other.
Rabbi Khan's going to be on in about 1 minute. That was
Okay. Oh, very good. Okay.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks.
my pleasure. So let me tell you real quickly.
Go ahead.
There was a publication in the late 70s and 80s, the Jewish Travel Guide before the internet, and it was for, I guess, observant Jews traveling to other cities for business or for vacation, where they can find kosher food, where they can find observant places to stay for a meal, for a shop, for a Sabbath. And the Khans were the #1 destination for Jews traveling to New Orleans, which happened all the time because of the convention centers and everything. And they have a guest book. I think they have 2 of them that they would have people sign. And I believe at last count, they had over 2,000 signatures or entries into this guest book. Just amazing people, amazing family.
Guys,
Somebody is talking, and
Yeah,
at the same time,
yeah.
it's hard to hear him.
it's okay. I think it was Raylene. I muted her. Okay.
Okay. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead,
Well,
Stephen.
no, some of the other stories, I think we would all have to take a shot
So-
of something.
So to jump in on the bandwagon with that story, in other words, he opened his house, Stephen, him and his wife, to 2,000 guests of New Orleans.
Dr. and Mrs. Khan, his folks.
Oh,
And I will tell you, let me tell you a quick story before he comes on. He was coming out of shul one Friday, and he saw two gentlemen standing outside of shul. They didn't have yarmulkes, but they were standing, they were right around the shul. So he started talking to them. He says, do you have a place to stay for Sabbath? And they said, no. So he says, you have to come with us. And Tzvi, this is Rabbi Khan, and he dragged them home. And his parents saw. The mother kind of got a weird vibe and said, look, I don't really necessarily feel so comfortable with them, but let's put them in the shul. The shul's close by. It was in a house. And they brought him to the shul. They put him in the shul. They ate with them Friday night. The next day they came to shul, ransacked, and it was cleaned out. And it turned out they were 2 escaped convicts, not Jewish. And they happened to be by the synagogue. And Tzvi was like, come, let's go. Come, you got to come to the house. He thought they were Jewish. He thought they needed a place. So that's one of the
Not so
stories
great stories.
Well, it's
Wow.
just the way he is, Rabbi, you say that we have to be good to each other. The truth of the matter is that's all the Torah talks about. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. It doesn't say anywhere we have to judge each other. We are judged. We are not the judgers, the judges. And,
He,
and there is
apparently
no,
his wife was a good judge of character. His wife judged these
yes,
people accurately.
yes.
So
Sarah,
sometimes it's good to have good judgment.
100%. The one thing that, and I'm sure you've spoken about Kashay Oref, right? That God informs everyone that we are stiff-necked people. And I heard a very interesting interpretation, because that does sound like an insult, right? And why would God be insulting us to the world? And I heard this Rabbi Ken Spiro, who said, of course we're Kashay Oref, of course we're stiff-necked. There's no way we would have survived 2,000 years in the diaspora in all different countries and to maintain our heritage and maintain our customs if we hadn't been so stubborn. So it's like everything else. There's a good and a bad to every mannerism and to every quality. There's ways to use it, good or bad.
That's a very good sermon to share with us. I appreciate that.
I'm a mortgage broker. That's not my job.
And you imitate a good rabbi. Anybody else want to share some thoughts about how we can all get along? Go ahead, Sharon.
Well, I was just going to say that I liked what the other people shared. I think kindness is tantamount to being open to healing and hope. And if we have some compassion for other people, and I don't think we should judge other people either. I think we should just try to understand their viewpoints. Sometimes it may be difficult, and maybe back off if it's too difficult. But I think we should be kind to one another. We should communicate to one another, and if something bothers us, we shouldn't bottle it up, so to speak, and just be upfront and say what we need to say, so that we can start recreating a bond between the different segments of Judaism, and between Democrats, Republicans, between states, between governments, etc. And I think that's important. And we do have Rabbi Zvi Khan in with us today. Yay! Okay, you're in the Finster, Rabbi.
Rabbi Khan, I want to welcome you to our discussion. And I also wanted to hit you right away with a question, because we've had a couple of people come on now and say that we shouldn't judge each other, that judging each other is something that's very harmful, and making judgments is a bad thing. I take a different point of view. I don't see it that way, but I wanted to ask you, in the Torah, it says that you should chastise your neighbor, because if you don't, then you'll share in their iniquity. And you should not follow after a multitude to do evil. You should speak up. And our people we've always spoken up and always judged right from wrong. And in fact, I believe that the failure to judge evil is the epitome of evil itself, and that judgment is required. Otherwise, you have no standards whatsoever. But I have some thoughts about that in addition, but I'd like to get your take on it. Then I'd like to share some thoughts, and maybe we can go back and forth a little bit, and then we'll open it up to everybody else, because I'm so glad you're here. So if you could address that question, I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say. And then maybe you could talk a little bit about the Sedra, which I covered a little bit, and then talk about Jewish unity. So you got a tall order there, in any order you like.
Thank you so much. I just want to apologize to everyone for being so late. I'm so sorry. I completely lost track of time, and my wife had to run down and say the program started. I'm very, very sorry.
No worries. You're worth waiting for, Rabbi.
Thank you so much. I look forward to getting together with everyone every week, and I don't know how it come on.
We won't judge you.
Thank you for not judging me. I appreciate that. Thank you. I think one of the key elements in that question of judging is to do our best to judge the actions of people, but not the people themselves. Meaning that it is important, as you said, Rabbi, it's important for us to be able to look at things and say, this is wrong, this is incorrect, this isn't appropriate, this is not the correct way to act from different perspectives. Sometimes we might be saying that from an ethical or a moral or a legal perspective. We might be saying it from a religious, from a Jewish values perspective. But I think the key is to always try our best to separate the person from the action. And there's a wonderful statement in the Ethics of the Fathers, which is a part of the Talmud, and it says that we should judge the entire. When we judge a person, we should judge the entire person. And what that really means, practically speaking, is we are not able to truly judge a person because we don't know everything that person's undergone. We don't know about the person's childhood. We don't know about the person's all kinds of different psychological impacts and dynamics and all kinds of things that they might have experienced. So when we say judge all of a person, I think what we really mean to say is, since that's impossible, what we do is we look at the person's actions, and that's where we can make a statement. And as you mentioned, chastising a person, it's true that certainly that's a verse in the Torah and a value in the Torah that we should share with other people and help them improve by explaining to them if we feel they've done something wrong and they've acted inappropriately. But again, if there's a big difference between going up to a person and saying, you were a wicked person, or you were a bad person, as opposed to saying to the person, let's talk about X action or Y action. Let's talk about a specific incident or an occurrence. And let me tell you why I really feel that was inappropriate. I'm sorry that you acted that way or that you said things that way. And let me tell you why I feel that, feel that way about shit. Because when we talk about what someone did or what someone said, that's a very different feel and a very different approach than when we try and talk about that person and how. And so that's why I think it's important to try not to do that.
Rabbi Kahn, I'm looking at Suzanne with the halo over her head. So I want you to put the halo over your head now. And if we were perfect angels, you're describing how we would be behaving. But on the internet, usually we don't have time to go into all those nuances and say, oh, I respect you very much and I think you're a great person, but I have a slight difference. Usually it comes across rather harsh, and there's a lot of anger and animosity. And also, I agree with what you're saying. When you're on the internet and you get some email from somebody, you're not really in a position to judge the whole person. You don't know anything about them. You just react to that. And I also believe, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, I believe that some of the people, when they become allied with a candidate or with a political party, they become rather cult-like. And I've noticed that. In other words, there's a big difference between me chastising another person and me criticizing the president. Now, the president's doing things that are going to affect millions or billions of people. Or Biden, if he becomes president and you're criticizing something he's doing, let's say you think he's bad on Israel, it's important that we voice that. But criticizing a candidate should be viewed as completely different than criticizing a person. But I've noticed that if I were to criticize a candidate like the president, some people will react in a way that's filled with hate and anger. And it reminds me of somebody in a cult. If you say something bad about the cult leader, they go all crazy and they start attacking you. And there's people on both sides of the aisle who will tend to do that. So I wanted to get your perspective on that, whether it's okay to criticize the leaders, and how do we do that, and how do we respond to that? Because right now, there's just so much animosity. One other thing I'm going to share with you. I've heard this said many times. I can no longer respect that person because they support that candidate. I've just lost all respect for them. I can't understand it. I can't see how they could do it. I have no respect for that person anymore. I've heard that 100 times. I wanted to get your response to that.
So let me go back to the first issue that you raised. First of all, just to clarify, my original comments, I wasn't thinking about politics. I was thinking more about good and bad and just and unjust and things like that. And of course, those issues can come into the political arena, but I really didn't have politics in mind at all. In terms of candidates and political parties and things like that, obviously one of the central values, one of the core values of our country is the freedom of speech. And the freedom of speech means nothing at all if it doesn't include the ability to, in political life, talk about what we agree with and what we disagree with from political parties, from political candidates, and to express it in the strongest ways possible. That's what our Constitution guarantees. And if we look at countries where that doesn't happen, where people are restricted and are not allowed to express themselves about the political leaders of the country or the political parties of the country, I think most of us would say we don't have an interest in living in a country like that. So it's a very cherished principle of the United States that we're able to do that. Again, I think people have to be, should try to be, and I know it's very hard and very challenging, but even in the political sphere, I think people have to try very hard to see both sides of the equation. I think most of the issues that are disagreed about in politics and political life in the United States are issues where there are two reasonable cases to be made, if not more. There's lots of different views on how these issues should be tackled and how these problems should be solved. Certainly, if we think of economics is a very complicated field, and yet you have people who act as if there's only one correct approach to solve a particular economic problem. Well, I don't think any economist in the field would ever agree with that. And I think that it applies to a lot of, to really in general across the board. We might think that we feel very strongly about a certain approach, but if we give it a chance and we read up about different approaches and that are invariant to our own, usually I found, and I think it's really true, that there are good reasons to on the other side of the issue as well. Of course, we have a responsibility to our own kind of thinking and conscience sometimes to say, okay, I get it. There are people who feel very differently than I do, but this is how I feel, and this is what I feel is best for the people of this country or the people of the world, as the case may be. But to me, that's if your question, if I understood it correctly, was, is it okay? Is it allowable? Is it acceptable to express strong feelings about the positions of the political leaders in our country? Yes, I think that's what it's all about. Again, to do that responsibly, though, I think you do have to do your research and you have to try and look at the different positions about a question, as opposed to just, I see many times in modern times, these last few years, people have an opinion and they're not interested in the facts. They're not interested in research. They're not interested in hearing about the other side. And I think that's very unfortunate.
I think fundamentalist religion tends to cause people to view things based on faith rather than facts, and to get very angry if you challenge their belief system. By the way, Rabbi Kahn, I didn't want to talk too much about the Torah passage because there's so many other things going on, and I think everybody else would like to weigh in on this. But I will tell you that before you arrived, Stephen shared with us the fact that you actually practice what most rabbis only preach when it comes to the hospitality of Abraham, because he was telling us that 2,000 people showed up at your door and you welcomed them with open arms. I can't think of a better way to epitomize what Vayera is all about having a big tent and opening up your home to other people and being gracious and hospitable. So I'm just going to leave it at that what you do is so much more important than reading a passage or talking about it. You are a wonderful example of the hospitality of Abraham. And I think just your example covers this passage. I did mention, I hope that people listen into us on Friday night, but my yarmulke is off to you for the hospitality that you have demonstrated. I would like to open it up now to others to weigh in on this about how Jews can join together, and what can we do now that the election is nearing an end where do we go from here and how do we heal the wounds? Let's open it up. Sharon, go ahead.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Yes. We have a couple things in our chat window, and I'd like to read them. Carol is still on, but I think she was driving. And I hope she didn't text this while she was driving. But Carol Robbins Garrett writes, what about judging because of how one dresses, or if they need to lose weight, or you just don't, whatever. Is that their action or their person? And she wrote, a candidate's in the public eye and the work for the public. So they are open to deciding if they're leading us properly. So there's some remarks about judging. And then Emily, do you mind if I read yours?
Let me just respond to Carol.
Okay, go
and
ahead.
Then maybe Rabbi Kahn could also.
Mhm.
There's a fascinating story in this Sedra, in Vayera, in which God tells a lie. And the reason why God lies is because he tells Sarah that she's going to have a child, and she laughs. And that's why Isaac got his name Yitzhak, which means laughter. She laughs, and she says, how could I have a child when my husband is so old? And then when God tells Abraham he's going to have a child, he laughs too. And God says, that's kind of funny. Your wife laughed also because she thought that she was too old to have a child. She didn't think she was too old. She thought, hey, I could do it. I'm good. But she laughed because of Abraham. But that would have humiliated Abraham, that his wife thinks that he's over the hill. So God actually tells a white lie and says, no, she was laughing because she was too old. So when I think of that passage, because you're asking, should I tell somebody that they're overweight, or should I tell someone that their clothes don't look good? I think that what this Sedra is telling us is that we should be scrupulously honest when it comes to things about morality and ethics and science. But when it comes to personal relations, like what does somebody look like or what are they wearing, I think we can bend the truth, and we don't have to make somebody feel bad. We don't have to always be honest if it's going to make somebody feel bad. That's cruelty. And if we were all perfectly honest and all shared our honest opinions about everybody else, we would be at war. So I don't think that we need to comment on what people are wearing. I especially find it offensive when it's directed towards women, which it is more often than not, as if, well, we're going to be judging women by appearance and men by something else. I don't find that helpful, and I don't think we should be judging, especially politically or in any way. And I also think that we should allow people to be free to defy convention. I wear clothes that went out of style in the 70s. I still have a whole drawer of tie-dye t-shirts that I wear. And I just like to do my own thing. I don't really care if it's in style or out of style. I don't really care. And I think we should give people the freedom, let them be who they want to be and not judge in that way. That's what I would suggest. Rabbi Kahn, what's your thought on that?
I could not agree more, and really couldn't come near saying it as articulately as you did, Rabbi. To start criticizing people for what they wear or their appearance is just so trite and trivial and mean and cruel, and no reason for that. And yet again, our society harps on that tremendously. If God forbid someone wears the wrong outfit or wears things that appear to clash or wear things that are not fashionable, but it's all, of course, ridiculous and hurtful. And in terms of Carol's second point about candidates being in the public eye, yes, I think that's a very excellent point. And candidates need to know when they run for political office that they're in for a lot of criticism and a lot of disagreement. Again, how we phrase our criticism and how we direct it, I think shows our own values in terms of the way we express ourselves. But absolutely, there's a difference. I might talk about a friend or a person at work as to how I might discuss a political candidate who is in the public eye. So I think Carol made two excellent points.
Yeah, I think so also. Having served in the Florida legislature and being taken out of the legislature by a guy who raised a ton of money and told a whole slew of lies against me, I think when you are in public office, you hold yourself open for criticism, but not to be lied about. When we lie about people in office, then we're not able to make a good decision about who to elect and who not to. When you can take a lot of money and warp the truth so that somebody looks like they're the devil, it's very, very scary. And there are some laws that hold people accountable. You have to tell the truth about candidates, but they're very few and far between and they're not really enforced. I think we should do a much better job of trying to hold people to the fire. I actually was I was running for office, and a guy sent out a hit piece against me 4 days before the election. And I filed a lawsuit and had him in court like the next day. And then he had to retract it. It was a bald-faced lie. He had to retract it and send a retraction to all the people that got his mailing. He had to send it out. I think it was like a week in advance, and it worked. But normally people don't have the ability to do that, and they're not attorneys, and normally the courts aren't that responsive. So lying about people, not a good idea. Who else?
Go ahead,
Emily.
Sharon.
Or do you want to just, okay. Okay, so Emily Jacobs Roberts wrote, I know this will sound trite, but basically if you can't say something good about someone, then just don't say anything. The basis for improving society is being kind. As my husband Jack taught me, if you can't do something about a problem or situation, then don't focus on it, just move on and do some good. I agree with Emily.
You know, I can't tell you how many people say to me, oh, this is terrible. Life is terrible. The election is terrible. The COVID crisis is terrible. You know, try focusing on the positive. Try living in the present. Again, if you can do something about it and affect change, then do it. If you can't, shut up and move on to something positive. Otherwise, you're going to be the kind of person people don't want to be around. And then you'll have more to complain about.
Well said.
Yeah.
Emily,
Well,
I know
ahead.
Emily is one of the people that call all of our members once a week or once every other week to see how they're
Lovely.
doing. And I know some people are uplifting and they're uplifted by her phone call. And some people are just down in the barrel. Basically what she said, they answer and say, oh, I'm this, woe is me. And there's nothing good about this. I know for myself, I mean, I didn't even know what Zoom was back in March. And I said, what is Zoom? Is this some kind of crazy program or something? And here I am leading hosting all the Zoom programs for the congregation. If somebody told me back in March that I would be assisting in producing the Shabbat videos and the holiday videos and everything else that we have for the temple, I would have said, yeah, right. Like I know how to do that. And yet that's what I'm doing. So out of the COVID came something positive, a way for me to bring about change, but
Exactly.
through my creative ability, rather than being down and out. When I talk to people, I'm like, I can't say enough. I mean, this has really turned my life around. So, I mean, yeah.
Well, I want to respond to Emily because Emily is really a great source of cheer and joy at L'Dor Va-Dor. She's always very upbeat and very positive, and it just is very pleasant to be with people who make you feel good and not bring you down. And as far as a positive attitude, I was raised with two parents with an incredibly positive attitude. So I agree with all that. However, I do believe that if we can criticize constructively, that's one of the greatest gifts that we can give to someone. I'm not talking about doing it out of anger or malice, but if you can point out something that can help somebody grow, it's really a good thing. Like I was playing tennis the other day, hitting off the wall. And there was some guy next to me and he was hitting also, and his form was pretty crummy. I guess he hadn't had lessons. And I said, you're hitting a really good ball. You might want to try like extending your arm a little more. And I think you could do even better. And he thanked me and he did. But I find when people point out things that I'm doing wrong, and fortunately I belong to a congregation where people aren't too hesitant to do that. I find that it's very, very helpful. especially if it's done in a positive way, because if somebody doesn't care, that they'll watch you destroy yourself or do stupid things, and they don't really care. But if somebody criticizes me and they do it from a good place, I'm just really thrilled that they really cared enough to tell me, and I can learn from that. But most people don't really like to hear negativity. If they hear anything negative, they get defensive. But if we can hear things that are negative about us and take it as constructive criticism, even if it's delivered in a way that's not all that respectable, we can grow a lot from it. I think it's very helpful. What, anybody want to talk about what's going on in the world today? I mean, everybody's at each other's throats. The Jewish people are in complete disarray and divisiveness. What do we do about that? How do we bring Jewish people together so that we can bring everybody else together? Somebody's got to have some thoughts about this.
I think Gloria wanted to say
Rabbi,
something. Go ahead.
I wanted to follow what you said. People who are very competitive don't like criticism or even what I would call a constructive comment. So Scrabble is my favorite game to play in the world. And if I'm playing with somebody and I see that there's a thing that's better than what they did, I'll tell them, but I'll first say, do you mind if I tell you there's a different way to do this? So it's very important to help, to offer help. And just following what you said, Rabbi, as far as being I'm very non-competitive, which some people might criticize me for, but I'm just not that competitive that I go off the wall if somebody is better than me. I say you could both be good. Why don't we share that we're both good?
Well, there's different ways of being competitive. There's some people who want to do the best they can. Like, I'm very competitive. When I'm out hitting the tennis ball, I want to hit it the best I can. And if somebody were to come over to me and tell me how to do it better, or if I deliver a talk and someone says, hey, you should have done this or that or the other thing, or a song or something, I love it. I just eat up, because I guess people who are insecure, when they hear somebody say a constructive criticism, especially if it's not delivered too well, they take it like you're bad and they don't handle it well. So it depends on the person. And also, there's some people who are very competitive and they have to cheat to win. In fact, I might even say, before they even lose, they might even say, it's all rigged. If I lose, it must be rigged. And I'm going to go crazy and I'm going to file suits. And I mean, there's some people who are just so competitive, they can't stand losing so much that they're horrible at, they're just horrible to play sports with. And if the person I'm talking about, if you talk to people who played golf with him, they will tell you that he was a horrible, horrible competitor, and that it was very ugly. And so how you compete means a lot. I can tell everything about a guy by playing tennis against him. I can play tennis or one-on-one basketball. By the time I'm done, I can tell you everything that you need to know about that guy's character. It really is very, very revealing. All right, who else? I think Carol.
Carol has her hand raised. Go ahead, Carol.
Hi, well, you were talking about the Jewish community, and you know, one of the things, like, for a while, I've been wearing a yarmulke. I'm not right now, but you know, and frowned on by people that are more Orthodox. In fact, people that are more Orthodox have come up to me and said, "Women don't wear yarmulkes. Why are you wearing a yarmulke? You shouldn't be wearing that." As well as, you know, maybe choosing to wear a tali on the bima. And I've even been told in circumstances, or heard other people spoken to, you know, you should have your arms covered, or, you know, you can't swim unless your legs are covered. You need to be wearing a skirt in the water. I mean, so we all have different customs, but expecting that other people in the Jewish religion from different communities would all follow the same cultures and the same customs. And I have seen in a couple of cases where different rabbis that I've been involved with have been from the community. I think it's fine if you ask somebody, like, do you want my feedback? But, you know, the people saying, oh, I don't like what you're wearing, and I don't think you should be wearing that, and I don't like, you should put on makeup, and you need to do your hair differently. And, you know, especially I've seen this with rabbis where it's been a huge problem in the community and really caused problems with the whole congregation. So
You mean where people told the rabbi what to wear, or the rabbi was telling other people?
the people told the rabbi what to wear. Specifically, well, no, one was male and one was female. So
Yeah.
it closed down a whole synagogue with one where the rabbi was overweight, and they said, "Oh, you should be wearing this, and you should be doing this," and you know, the other where the female rabbi ended up leaving because it just was untenable.
Yeah, it's too bad. That's too bad.
Carol, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rabbi. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Rabbi.
I wanted to comment on the very first point you made. In Orthodox circles, it's not at all uncommon for people to have a misunderstanding about situations where someone wants to do something that they're not obligated to do. And it's very common for people, because it seems strange to them, or it seems different or weird to them, or to decide it's wrong and it shouldn't be done. Your example of a woman wearing a kippah is an excellent example. According to Jewish law, according to halacha, a woman is not obligated to wear a kippah, but that doesn't mean she's not allowed to. And that's really the crucial difference. The same thing is true of a talit. It's very rare to see in Orthodox circles a woman wear a talit. However, the Code of Jewish Laws explicitly states that a woman is not obligated to, but if she would like to, she can. And that is that distinction between not being obligated to do something, but on the other hand, being allowed to do it, is something that goes over the head of a lot of people in the Orthodox community. So I just wanted to, I certainly agree with your point, and I feel I want to apologize to you on behalf of anyone who said, who made you feel badly for doing something that you wanted to do for a spiritual reason. You wanted to do something to be closer to God, be closer to the Jewish values or Jewish commandments. And if anyone, people should spend their time trying to support others as opposed to trying to put down others who are doing something that they may not be used to. And I think a lot of us put too much emphasis on what we're used to and what we're not used to, what we're accustomed to seeing and what we're not accustomed to seeing. But we have to be a lot more broad-minded than that.
Yeah, it's funny that you would think that they would think, oh, this is great. A fellow Jew comes to synagogue and wants to put on an article to show her sanctity or to show that she is respectful. Instead of seeing all that, they just say, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. But there's a lot of things also, Rabbi, that you're not supposed to do. I mean, in the Orthodox religion, there's a lot of things that you can't do this or you shouldn't do this, a lot more so than with more liberal branches. I mean, we have our own things also. Oh, you could walk into a Reformed synagogue, and if you're wearing something, somebody will tell you about it. But there's a lot of rules go around there, and I'm not sure what your take on all of that is, but I think that it's okay to have customs, but I agree with you. We need to give people the license to be able to do what they want, not worry about it so much. I mean, if somebody comes in a synagogue wearing jeans, who cares? In some places, oh, this is terrible. I don't really care, but to some people, it's a big deal. By the way, Stephen has a special guest. Do you want to introduce your guest?
Steve, you're on mute.
No, that was my granddaughter was just leaving. I'm so sorry to guys, but she was fixated on seeing herself on the.
Oh,
Horrible.
she's adorable.
Very nice.
But
I
Rabbi,
thought it was your daughter.
No, my daughter's. Sweet. Didn't Raji's daughter put on tefillin? I think there's a Masorah that she did.
Where'd you get these?
I don't know that specifically,
Package
but
come today?
there are lots of other examples of people doing things that they weren't obligated to do, but were allowed to do, and other people, being put off by that until they kind of learned the truth or the correct approach, which is that in most of these cases, if you are not obligated to do it, you're still allowed to do it if you choose to. But I don't remember the specific.
Rabbi, what's your take on some of the older rabbis of the past, some of the more traditional ones, who said that women should not study Talmud and things like that, that it would be bad for them and they're forbidden to do that? What's your take on all that? Do you think that was just a mistake of the past? And if so, why would people, even come up with certain things like that.
I think, look, the Talmud was written 2,000 years ago. And the society and the culture was very, very different than our own society and culture is today. The vast majority of Orthodox rabbis today look at the fact that women's educational levels and educational abilities and capacities are equal to men, and that women's accomplishments in all fields in education are if not equal to, surpass those of men. So most rabbis say, whatever a woman wants to study about Judaism, bavakasha, absolutely, she should do that. And
Rabbi, I don't want to insult you, but you sound almost like a Reform rabbi.
Absolutely.
Also, does that extend also to becoming a rabbi? So in Orthodoxy, can women be rabbis, or is there some reason why they can if they have the same capabilities and sometimes better capabilities in some areas?
The Orthodox standard position, although it's being tested in its very, very, very liberal kind of left-wing parts, is that only men can be rabbis. But there's a difference, obviously, between serving as a rabbi in a synagogue and serving as and studying the text of Judaism. And in terms of studying the text of Judaism, again, I think there's a real distinction, a very clear distinction about certain statements. Even in the Talmud itself, there were different views about the issue of women and what they should study or maybe shouldn't study. But times have radically changed, and if the women in our society are studying everything in the world, every conceivable subject, does it really make sense to say to them, oh, study all those things, but don't study certain Jewish texts? It really wouldn't. It really is not a very tenable position. However, to be accurate and to be fair, there are still branches or parts of the Orthodox community that absolutely insist upon the fact that women in their circles should not study Talmud, but should really focus their time on studying other Jewish texts. For example, studying Torah, studying Halakha, Jewish law, studying different other books, but not the Talmud. The Talmud is viewed as something that's not going to be particularly beneficial or useful for them to study. So I don't want to deny or try and cover up the fact that there are branches in Orthodoxy that strongly believe that. But it's clear to me that the majority of Orthodox rabbis and branches today want women and support women studying every conceivable Jewish text, because we need knowledgeable Jewish women, just like we need knowledgeable Jewish men. And there's a lot of ignorance about Judaism amongst men and women, Jewish men and Jewish women.
Well, if you say that we're in a radically different world and we think very differently than we did 2,000 years ago, as an Orthodox rabbi, what makes you Orthodox? What is it that is your bottom line? Like, these are certain things that don't change, or is there anything? Is it what is it then that you can say, even though we're in a radically different world, this is constant, and this is what makes me Orthodox. This is what we believe. Are there certain core beliefs, or is everything up for grabs?
Oh, absolutely. There are not just certain core beliefs. There's an entire system of beliefs and Jewish law and practice and things like that. I would say it starts with the idea of belief in God. That is something that in Orthodoxy is absolutely can't start. There's no starting without a belief in God and an embracing of the fact that God exists and created the universe. Then nothing else can come after that. So that's a primary core belief and core value. After that would come the idea that God gave the Torah. God gave the Torah to the Jewish people through Moshe, and gave it with, and it was given with an explanation, with an oral law, an oral explanation that doesn't compose the entire Talmud, but is included in the discussions that are in the Talmud. The Talmud is actually includes tremendous amount of information that is above and beyond the oral law. But the oral law, the oral traditions of Judaism are ensconced there. And then the idea that these things are still obligatory for Jews to follow today, whether it was 100 years after Moses or 500 years or 1,000 years, or as we are today, 3,500 years after Moses and Revelation at Sinai. The Orthodox belief is that we're still obligated to do the commandments to the best of our ability. Now,
But a lot of the commandments you don't do anymore. A whole bunch of them. Out of the 613, I would say at least half you probably don't do anymore. So how do you figure out which ones? Like, I don't think you go around sacrificing a brown heifer. You probably haven't done that lately, right? To get rid of your sins.
So from the beginning of the Torah, from its very inception, it was clear, and if one just reads the text of the Torah, they'll see this. It's very basic, that certain commandments were intended only to only applied, were only applicable in certain situations and at certain times. So we don't have to just focus on modern times. The truth is, even in the time of Moses, when the Jewish people received the Torah, there were certain commandments that only applied once they went into the land of Israel.
How do you know that? Because it says it only applies in the land of Israel?
Correct, exactly.
Like the commandments about stoning a woman if she's not a virgin when she gets married. It didn't say except only in the land of Israel or only at this time. It was just blanket, or stone a disrespectful child, or stone somebody who's picking up sticks on the Sabbath. Those things didn't say only when you get to Israel or only for the next 100 years. These were like eternal commands, right? As far as the Torah is concerned, there's no limitations time-wise or any other restrictions on it, as far as I know.
So there are two things to keep in mind. One is that the idea of what's obligatory in Israel or outside of Israel is only one piece of the pie. There are other things, other conditions that have to be in place, but most commandments in the Torah have some kinds of conditions in terms of applicability. When do they apply? When do they not apply? Where do they apply? Where do they not apply? In what situations do they apply? The examples that you gave of a Jewish court carrying out a death penalty, that entire concept could only happen at a time when the Sanhedrin was in place and was established in. So you had to have Jews in Israel, and you had to have the Sanhedrin to be able for the capital punishment to be carried out. In addition, as I mentioned,
of course, the Torah doesn't say that, though. That's something that's what you would ascribe to the oral law, right? Well, because it's not in the Torah anywhere.
No, in some cases, these kinds of limiting factors or applicability issues are mentioned in the Torah or hinted to, alluded to in the Torah, and sometimes they're more part of the oral law and the oral traditions. It depends which ones what each one would be a different case. But in the Jewish system of jurisprudence and in the Jewish legal system, there's a lot of detail and a lot of, you might take technical points and things like that. And one great example is a statement in the Talmud where it says, even though there are so many cases in the Torah itself where it looks like a Jewish court, a Beit Din, would carry out a capital punishment case, in actual reality, if a Jewish court, in the time when Jewish courts were functioning and they had the ability to carry out capital punishment cases in the land of Israel, if a Jewish court executed someone once in 70 years, it was viewed as a bloodthirsty court. In other words, it was rare for the Jewish courts, the Beit Din, when they had the authority to carry out capital punishment, for them to actually do so. And that's a different picture than we might have if we weren't aware of the whole slew of technical things that surround these different laws.
But that was a reform. Some reformed Jews came along and changed the Torah, because the Torah doesn't say that. The Torah doesn't say you should only execute somebody in 70 years. It just says categorically every time, no exceptions. Disrespectful child, stoned. Woman's not a virgin on marriage, zapped. You're violating the Sabbath, you're executed. You're worshiping the wrong God. I mean, the things that you're talking about are things that came after the Torah. Now, I understand the Orthodox will say, well, that's because of the oral law. It was actually given to Moses. He whispered it to Joshua, and he whispered it to the next guy. And then 2,000 years ago, somebody decided to write it down in the Talmud. But these are things that came long after the Torah, right?
Let me respectfully disagree. A major part of these rules sometimes are written explicitly in the Torah. For example, for a Jewish court, a Beit Din, to be able to carry out capital punishment, or for that matter, to punish anyone for any crime, the crime had to be witnessed by two witnesses, and the two witnesses had to warn the perpetrator about not to commit the act. Now that in and of itself makes it much more rare and much more difficult. And though that's based on actual verses in the Torah.
What verse says that? That's something that you say is hinted at, right? There's some verse and then somebody extrapolates, right?
Let me quote the verse for you. Al pi shnayim edim o shlosha edim yakum davar. Through the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, these matters should be established. Meaning, if you don't have 2 witnesses, and there's a whole question as to why it says 2 or 3, then you can't go forward with the verdict. You can't carry out the verdict. That is an actual verse in the Torah. That's not something.
Yeah, it also says in Deuteronomy that if you see your son urging people to worship another god, you should be the first one to throw the stone and execute him. Right? And obviously, okay, so let's say you have 2 witnesses. So your parents hear it. Is that okay? Your parents take you out to the city square and stone you to death? Is that okay?
All punishments and regular types of punishments, all the way up through capital punishment, had to be carried out through the Beit-Din system. There was no such thing, except one exception of people taking the law into their own hands. So and let me say this, just to put what's the right word, to put a bottom line on it. The bottom line is that the many things, technical issues and applicability issues, are in the Torah itself, in the text of the Torah itself. Many other things are part of the oral tradition. Some things are in the middle where they're alluded to or hinted to, and the oral tradition explains them. But it's a very complicated system. If you ever wondered to yourself, how can it be that these guys sit and study in yeshiva for years and years and years and become old and gray? This is part of the answer, because it's a very large, complicated system and a lot to study and read. But
that system didn't work out too well 25 years ago, did it?
I don't know.
When Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated 25 years ago to this day, before his killer assassinated him, he went to a Beit Din, and 3 ultra-Orthodox rabbis said, go for it. This guy is giving away Israeli territory, and it was all given by God. And a Beit Din authorized him to execute Yitzhak Rabin 25 years ago, a war hero, leader of the IDF, leader of peace. And what's even more outrageous, if that's possible, is that before he was executed, they had rallies in which Netanyahu appeared at some of these rallies, and Rabin would be depicted in a Nazi uniform. And they would vilify him as a Nazi, knowing that in the land of Israel, if you depict someone as a Nazi, that's like a death sentence. They were doing this and screaming and yelling, and some crazy guy came along, went to a Beit Din, and they just said, go for it. I think we need to reevaluate a little bit about how seriously we're going to take some of these passages in the Torah, and whether the Beit Din is a really good safeguard to make sure that there are no excesses. Just in my opinion.
I think I question the validity of that story. My understanding is that the Yigal Amir, who was the assassin, went to one particular rabbi, and that one particular rabbi did not explicitly tell him, no, this is forbidden. And so he drew a conclusion on his own from this that he could go ahead and do it. I am not aware, and it's a horrific incident. And I'm not trying, of course, to defend it or make any excuses for it. It was outright murder and assassination, and there is no justification for the murder of Yitzhak Rabin. But I've read extensively on the subject, and I have never read that there was a Beit Din or Jewish court of 3 rabbis who would ever have said that something like that could be okay.
That's how I heard it. But anyway, you would agree that if there was one rabbi and he said, he didn't tell him not to do it, that's pretty bad, right?
That's terrible, but there's a lot of bad people in the world, and unfortunately terrible. Look, Yigal Amir himself was a religious Jew, and he did something that's completely unjustifiable, and he committed a political murder.
Well, you know what Christopher Hitchens said? He said, good people do good things, and bad people do bad things. But to get a good person to do a bad thing takes religion. So I would qualify that takes a fundamentalist view of religion, in which you think God is commanding you to do stuff. And by the way, that's in the Sedra this week, where Abraham is told to sacrifice his son. And the fundamentalist Christians love this story. They think it's awesome. Wow, he was so faithful, he's going to execute his own son. And they equate Isaac with Jesus because Isaac was miraculously born through a work of God. And so he's like God's son and he's sacrificing his son. They think it's wonderful. And a lot of the Orthodox rabbis that I know also think it's wonderful. Abraham, he's a great guy. He's hearing God's telling him to kill his son and he does it, or he's willing to do it. But then he asks him to kill God's going to kill a bunch of strangers. And for these strangers who are really evil, he goes to bat for them. But for his own son, he doesn't even raise a peep. From my way of thinking, all that indicates is that Jews are evolving. And we didn't start out perfect. Abraham did some great things. No doubt, he was a stellar character who went to bat for other people, but he wasn't perfect. And the reason why Judaism, I believe, is so successful is because it's able to evaluate it. And as we say, to judge. It's able to form judgments and say, you know what? I'm not going to just do everything that Abraham did or everything Moses did. I'm not going to wipe people out if they're worshiping the wrong God. I'm going to judge and I'm going to grow and I'm going to take the good and try to evolve. So, and I think that's really what progressive Judaism is all about. It sounds to me, Rabbi, that you're pretty much there also. You would agree with that Judaism is evolving and improving.
Quickly, I want to ask Rabbi Khan, you just said someone was a good Jew. Is a good Jew someone who keeps 2 sets of dishes, or is a good Jew someone who is a good person who then identifies as being Jewish?
I think there's all kinds of ways to define what a good person is and what a good Jewish person is. Specifically, if we're talking about Jews, there's no doubt in my mind that the Torah, the goal of the Torah is to try and produce people who are good in a ethical and moral sense, and also in a religious and a spiritual sense. And it's not always easy to combine those two things. And many times you have a person who says, my whole everything for me is being based on being kind and good. And that's excellent, but that's not the end all, at least in my opinion, from a Jewish perspective. I think a Jewish perspective says that's fantastic, but that's part of that. That's a good half, let's say. But it's also important to embrace the teaching of Judaism in a ritual sense and in a spiritual growth sense as well. So I think it's a real challenge to try and put all those things together, but to really shoot to be a good person in a Jewish sense, I think a person should be trying to do both of those areas.
Now, Rabbi Khan, I'm going to ask you another question. I guess it's kind of difficult because you're dealing with a rabbi and a lawyer. So now I got another question I want to ask you. It's a friendly question, and I'm sorry if there's certain things that I'm raising that are uncomfortable, because you can raise stuff with me that makes me squirm. I'm happy to squirm around a little bit, but I just think it's helpful to just flesh out different concepts. And I don't get too many Orthodox rabbis who are willing to subject themselves to inquiry too often. So let me just ask you this. Your belief about being Jewish, about Orthodoxy, is that you first have to believe that in a God, and then you have to believe that God delivered the Torah, and then you should probably believe that you should do the things in the Torah because God ordered it or commanded it. What if you got some crazy guy like me who calls himself a rabbi but doesn't believe in a personal God, and doesn't believe that an infallible being wrote the Torah, believes it was written by people, and believes therefore that there's certain things that make sense and certain ones that don't? First of all, can I be a good Jew? And secondly, do you have a moral and ethical obligation to chastise me and straighten me out, even if it might hurt my feelings or even if it might embarrass me? It wouldn't, because I love when people challenge my ideas, but let's just say that it would embarrass me in front of all these other people and it would make me look bad. Do you think that you have an ethical obligation to stand up for Judaism and to say, wait a minute, this guy is leading people astray. He's telling them that they can be Jewish and ignore the very core of Judaism, the very basic principles about God and the Torah. I need to straighten him out and set the record straight. And I think that has a lot to do, and maybe we could end it on this because we've been going back and forth for a while. I think that has a lot to do with how Jews can get along. because there's a lot of Jewish people out there who think that I am worse than the devil. They consider me worse than the worst of the Christians or the Muslims, because I'm like a Trojan horse. I'm like eating away and destroying Judaism from within, luring people out and making them think that they could actually be Jewish. I'll give you just one example before I let you answer that. There was an Orthodox rabbi that I helped as an attorney, and I did free work for him. And he said, "What do I owe you?" I said, "You don't owe me anything. You're doing God's work. I'm glad to help. But I do ask you one thing. If someone asks you to do an interfaith wedding, I know you're not going to do it, so it's not going to cost you anything. Could you refer it to me?" And he said, "No, I can't refer it to you." And I said, "Why not?" And he said with a totally straight face, without any hesitancy at all, he said, "I can't refer it to you because if you did the wedding, they would think that they were actually getting a Jewish wedding, but what you do is not Judaism. And so therefore, they would think that they were married, but they would not be married Judaically, and I would be committing a sin." So that vignette that I'm asking you fits in with this big picture. Do you have an obligation to straighten me out? And if you do, how do we do that so it doesn't affect Jewish unity? Because I can take it, but a lot of people can't. So I'm going to let you respond to that. Maybe we can conclude there, and then I'll share a response, then we can end it.
Sure. It's real for me. It's really simple. It's very straightforward, and it connects to something a point Emily made some time ago, and that is that it makes no sense to me to get caught up in all kinds of vitriolic argumentation and deep, profound disagreements and telling people, chastising people. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm not saying there's no place for it or there has never, ever been a place for that kind of thing in Jewish history. But nowadays, in modern times, the Jewish people have so many problems to deal with. We're so beleaguered and so beset with so many different types of issue. I'm talking about the world Jewish community. That really, I believe every Jewish person should simply focus on doing the positive. And that's why I made the reference to what Emily said. To focus on the negative, and for me to spend time and energy trying to chastise people who I think need to be chastised, well, I'd have to spend my entire life 24/7 going around doing that. That would accomplish nothing for me, and I don't think it would accomplish much for anybody else. So the reason, you know, what I try to be about, and Rabbi, I feel it's what you try to be about as well. The reason what I try to be about is making a positive difference in any way that I can. Sometimes that means trying to help people in a material way or a physical way. Sometimes it means trying to give someone support psychologically or emotionally. Sometimes it means trying to teach about Judaism and Jewish values to the best of my ability to people who want to hear about that. I have no desire to try and force my views on anyone or force any knowledge that I might be blessed to receive.
Well, I appreciate that, but I don't want you to force your ideas on me. But I would just be interested in an exchange. If you believe these things are central to Judaism, I would think that you would believe that it would be harmful if a whole bunch of people don't believe it. And I appreciate what you're saying, because you are an extremely positive person. I heard it from Stephen, what you do, and I've seen you in action here. You're very positive, and you're what Judaism should be. You're what rabbis should be. People who bring people together and who see Judaism as a way of believing in certain values and also sharing love with other people. But I happen to think, I guess it's the science part of me in me, that there is certain things that are true or not true. So like if I'm running around saying that 2 and 2 is 5, and I create a whole religion based on 2 and 2 being 5, and you're saying, no, 2 and 2 is 4, I would think you might have there might be some desire on your part to say, hey, wait a minute, it's 4. You guys are all going off the deep end, and it's affecting your practice of Judaism. Or do you not think that? Do you think that I can believe my way and it's fine, and your way is fine, and it's all good? The humanists, it's all good. Reconstructionists, like they're all the same. It's all, as long as you're nice people, it's all good. I don't think you believe that, but is that something? Is that what your belief is?
I believe in reality, and reality is that there are all kinds of thoughts and opinions and ways of practicing Judaism in the world. And it doesn't make sense for me to try and bang my head against that fact, because no matter how long I bang my head against that fact, it's still going to be a fact the next morning. That is a fact of life. There's all kinds of denominations in Judaism, all kinds of rabbis in Judaism, all kinds of people in Judaism, and they believe different things and they do different things. So again, for me, it just boils down to, I'm not going to fight that reality, because that's reality. What can I do inside of reality to help people, to do things that people that could benefit them in any way, and that's what it's all about. That's the bottom line for me.
Now I'm going to ask you one more question. I thought that was the last one. I'm going to ask you one more question. So Christians believe that Jesus had his own son murdered, so that some of us would be able to get into heaven if we guessed right about the right God, and the rest of us would go to hell. And in their scriptures, there's all types of things saying that the Jews were instrumental in killing Jesus, and Mel Gibson made a whole movie about it. And we've been dying for thousands of years because of this erroneous nonsense. Do you feel any obligation as a rabbi to straighten those folks out? Or do you think that just let them go and believe what they want to believe, even though we keep ending up on the wrong end of genocide every couple of generations?
I think that Christians and obviously there's so many different streams in Christianity, and so many different views and beliefs and practices. But I think people of any religion, Christians, Muslims, whatever religion you want to put on the table, should have a right to practice what they see fit, and within their community to teach what they see fit. Where I draw the line and I say no is where it leads to suffering for other people. So,
but it already, well, it does though. The Christian scripture is an anti-Semitic blueprint.
So what I'm saying is, I have no interest, nor do I think Jews should have a particularly strong interest in trying to decide what kinds of sermons priests or pastors or ministers should give. But if they put in the public forum that we have to fight against the Jews, we have to oppress the Jews, we have to hurt the Jews, we have to make the Jews suffer, then I think every Jewish person, not just rabbis, has to try and fight against that to the best.
Rabbi, have you ever seen the movie The Passion of the Christ?
I have not, but I've read a lot about it. I know the basic. I know.
Okay. I'm gonna spare you the gory details. So you don't have to see it, but I'm gonna tell you what's in it. Okay, what's in it is Jewish people reveling and rejoicing in the vicious, gratuitous, gruesome, grisly suffering of Jesus. He's being whipped and flogged and crucified, and these Jewish people are just loving every minute of it. And then they throw coins to Judas, which, by the way, the word name Judas, as you probably know, is Latin for Jew. And it's synonymous with a traitor. He's a Judas. That means he's a traitor because of Christian scripture. So that in the movie, they throw 30 pieces of silver to Judas, his reward for betraying the Son of God. And the money falls to the ground, and he's picking coins up off the ground, reinforcing the stereotype of Jewish people picking up money off the ground. And the whole thing is just hideous. Now, if a Christian kid, they're showing this to tens of millions of Christian kids right now. And 2 of them shot up a synagogue after seeing a movie like this, went into a synagogue and killed the Jews because the Jews are children of the devil, according to Christian scripture. This movie is a training film for anti-Semitism and for genocide against Jews. I saw the movie. It's hard to watch it, especially if you're a kid, without hating Jewish people. You really are left with nothing else but, I hate these people. I'm going to get even with them. That's what they're teaching. And I find it surprising, I guess, that I seem to be one of the only rabbis around that seems to have an issue with that. And it's not just the movie. The movie, Mel Gibson said, hey, what do you have against the movie? This is just the truth with a capital T. And in a way, he's right, because if Gospels is synonymous with truth, like gospel truth, his movie is taken strictly from the Gospels. There's not a word in it. Even the quotations that he has Jews saying, we're of the devil or crucify him. I mean, it's all quotations where the Jewish mob is screaming, crucify the guy. So would you join with me in challenging that belief, even though it's in somebody's scripture? Or do you think that, hey, If it makes them feel good, go for it.
Again, I don't know how to, articulate it differently than what I said before. If there are things that are promoting violence against Jews, we have to resist them to the best of our ability in every situation when they come up. You're telling me that there's a movie that when people watch it, they're inspired, especially if they're young, if they're children, to actually attack Jews and hurt Jews, then yes. That
not only that, there's also a book. It's called the New Testament. And when they used to read it on Good Friday, people used to go out in mobs and cause pogroms on Good Friday. I know, because I know people who are actually on the wrong end of that, who very old people who told me about it. Yes, there's a movie and there's a book and there's a religion that constantly is causing anti-Semitism because of their beliefs. It's not a hypothetical. But anyway, we can put that off for another time. Go ahead, Stephen.
Well, Rabbi, first of all, I watched the other videos that you guys did, and you've heard this, I'm sure. You're a remarkable person. I mean, we obviously disagree on a lot of things, but you're a remarkable person, the stuff, mythology and everything. But you just said, you were just, I think, speaking derogatorily about the New Testament, what the New Testament is for Christianity. But I find it interesting that Reform Judaism is a New Testament to Judaism in terms of, well, let me just very quickly give you a quick background. Rabbi Kahn and I became religious about 1.5 years apart. I'm a year older than he is. I became religious in Memphis in a yeshiva that I went to not knowing anything. And I became religious as an intellectual pursuit. It wasn't a faith or I don't believe anything. I don't have faith in anything. I believe I found what I consider to be proof that God had to write the Torah. And once you find that, you should probably pay attention. So that was my approach. So I'm not into guilt, and I'm not into guilting other people. I probably judge people like anyone else does, but it's more of a personal problem than it is a religious representation. But it's interesting to me, mythology, like you mentioned mythology, which I thought was fascinating. I think you have the source and the sequel mixed up. I think the source is the Torah and the sequel are concepts in mythology. But my point is that if somebody were to teach a class in mythology, but change the whole thing, change the characters, change their description, change their roles in but call it mythology, I have a feeling you're a mythology redefining the characters that were founded in mythology and turning them into other things or teaching other lessons. And to me, that's what I think. Reform Judaism, I don't have a problem with anybody doing anything. It's not our job to judge anybody, but Judaism is defined by the Torah. There's no other source for it. That's the
I appreciate that, and I appreciate your candor. So let me just suggest that you've definitely judged Reform Judaism. If you're bracketing it with Christianity and saying that there's only one Judaism in the Torah and what Reform's doing is something different, you're totally judging it, but I'm cool with that. I want people to judge.
It's not a judgment. It's my impression, to be honest.
Okay, your impression. Okay. Well, your impression would be interpreted by most other people as a judgment, but I'm good with that because I want people to judge what I'm doing. And if it comes out in a negative way, that's fine. I can respond to it. But let me just suggest this to you. My belief is that any book, my book, your book, their book, any book that you say is the word of God is exceptionally dangerous and is probably going to cause people to die. Okay? I don't care whose book it is. If it's the Jewish scripture, in Jewish scripture, genocide was committed. You might believe, well, there was no the Sanhedrin didn't authorize it, so it probably never took place. All those stories about Moses wiping out thousands of people and killing the women and children, and Joshua wiping out Jericho, you might think, well, maybe they had it coming, or maybe the Sanhedrin came in at the last minute and just didn't mention that. But the Jewish scripture is a blueprint for mass murder. Christian scripture is a blueprint for mass murder also. You can make a face, but if you read Jewish scripture and you read Deuteronomy, you will see it says, if your son brings back to you a doctrine unknown to your parents and your teachers, stone him to death and let you be the first one. And genocide was committed over and over and over and over again. Do you know how many tribes, how many nations were wiped out by the Jews? Not just a few people, I mean genocide. How many times did that happen? So this is not open to debate, it's in there. Now, Christian scripture is a blueprint for mass murder also, because it's saying that God's gonna wipe out every single person who doesn't believe in Jesus. So if you wanna act godlike, you might as well beat them to the punch, because maybe before they die, they might come around. That's why they had the Spanish Inquisition, because the Jews were gonna go to hell, but these nice people were torturing us to death so that we might come around, and maybe we'd suffer a little bit here, but we'd be saved for all eternity. The Quran is telling people that if you kill someone who doesn't believe like you do, you'll get an instant pass to heaven. And if you kill a lot of people, you can bring a bunch of people with you. You can bring family members. So in my opinion, all of these books taken literally are bad news. Now, as far as Judaism is concerned, and you say, well, the Orthodox, they practice, the Torah, and Reform and other people, they're doing something else. In my opinion, Judaism, the whole essence of Judaism is reform. Judaism has always been changing since the get-go. And Rabbi Kahn mentioned it also. It says certain things in the Torah, and then the Talmud says something else, and then some other guy in the Shulchan Aruch says something else. Judaism is always changing. There's only one difference. Reform acknowledges the change and says, we're going to go with that. And the Orthodox tend to pretend that it didn't really happen. Oh, no, there wasn't a change. God whispered something to Moses, and 2,000 years later, somebody wrote it down. And all the things in the Torah are now different because it was always the same, but somebody just wrote something down differently. The whole thrust of Judaism is change. So you could say that Reform is the most authentic type of Judaism there is, because it's part of the Jewish whole pattern of change. Abraham never set foot in a synagogue, or never read a Siddur, or he actually didn't keep kosher. In the story of Abraham, he's serving cheese and a calf. Like that's really like the number one sin of kashrut, and not just chicken and milk, but a calf.
But you can,
and cheese.
But you can have the meat after the milk. But no, listen, Rabbi, what you're saying is right in a sense, but I think you might be mistaking Judaism as changing with some of the different ways that some of the things that were lost are being interpreted. And there were definitely some details of laws that were lost that are now subject to different customs. It doesn't mean that they've changed. Things that were stated as being wrong are still wrong.
Well, let me just ask you something. Do you accept as literally true these stories of God ordering the Jews to commit genocide, like about 10 different times? Do you accept that? Did that actually happen?
With Amalek, with stories about Amalek, with stories of certain thing, Moab, there's certain situations where we were told to go to war. Okay, but
no, that wasn't war.
It was.
That was genocide. What did Joshua do to Jericho? Remember? The sun stood still in the sky.
It's supposed to be about healing and unity. Oh.
All right, Shannon, thanks for getting us back. All right, so we'll continue that some other time. Let me wrap it up by saying this.
Oy.
I believe the way to unity is what we're doing right now. It's not to pretend that we don't have differences. It's not to say, hey, you know what? Rabbi Kahn and I, we really believe in the same thing. Everything we think is the same. There's no difference. That's not how you achieve unity. A lot of interfaith groups and try to make it that way. Oh, we all believe the same thing. We don't. I don't believe the same as Rabbi Kahn in certain respects. Some things we fundamentally disagree. But in the core values of Judaism, helping people, Rahmanas, using our mind, being able to engage with others. And also, I agree with you, Rabbi Kahn, Jewish tradition, to root these values in something that links us with our past, Jewish scriptures that give us an idea of what it is that we believe. These things are very valuable. So I think the secret to Jewish unity is exactly what we're doing right here. And it's what they did in the Talmud, is to disagree agreeably and not pretend we don't disagree, or not be afraid to say what we disagree with, and not for you to be afraid to tell me, I think you're dead wrong. I think you're off about this. We need to be able to take it, and we need to be able to welcome it. We need to be able to say, thank you. Thank you for trying to straighten me out. I appreciate it, because I'm sure I'm wrong about a bunch of things. What we're doing now, as divisive as some people might find it, I think is the key to healing. And the other key to healing, I think, is what Rabbi Kahn does, to open up his home and his heart to every single Jewish person and every other person, and to just say, my ideas might be different than yours, I don't really care. And to be like Abraham, just open up your tent and welcome everybody. That's what we need to do now to get through this period. Because right now, Jews, we're in a heap of trouble. We're very divisive. And if we can't join together, we'll never accomplish our important goals. So I think that this is a good exercise. I think the disagreement is healthy, even though Sharon might be a little uncomfortable with it. I think it's healthy. I think it's good. And I thank you for it. And Rabbi Kahn, I'm going to give you the last word.
I think Sharon's right. Actually, we got way off of what we were talking about. But of course, there's all kinds of things to talk about. It's hard to always stay directly on track. If I am going to give the last word, I would just say this: within a relatively short time, we're going to have a new president elected in this country. There's going to be very passionate feelings about people whose candidate does not win, whoever that might be. And then that's where what we've been talking about in terms of unity and healing is going to really be needed. And it's going to hopefully kick in that we can accept whoever the new president is. We've got to throw our support behind him, whether it's President Trump or it'll be at that point, President Biden. We've got to say, hey, let's do whatever we can to help the country unify and move ahead in a positive way.